Hello guys, and once again welcome back to our YouTube channel. I am very excited to have you all here today because today we will be talking about the anatomy of a monster that, if you look at it, has no anatomy at all. Most people know it as a formless, gooey red mass from a low-budget cult classic horror and sci-fi movie, and it is obviously the Blob. Yep, the same one that terrorized and devoured many people in Steve McQueen's character's hometown. But today we will be dissecting its anatomy and diving into all the different origins it has in all three movies, and a new upcoming one as well by Warner Brothers. With no face, no skeletal structure, or even any organs, Blob is a shapeless menace with abilities that are unbelievable. But no worries, we will talk about what its body is actually made of, how it works, its shifting organs, and what its secret and sole weakness is. From when it was just a mindless organism to when it started displaying signs of intelligence. From one time period's concern reflected in the movie to the next time periods, we cover it all in this video. So sit with us patiently while we take you through the whole thing. Let's go. Oh, and by the way, spoiler warning. What actually is the Blob? Alien, government weapon, or something else? So one of the most intriguing and frequently asked questions is, what is Blob? People hear a lot of different answers for this. It is an extraterrestrial entity, it is a lab-grown accident, and other related descriptions. While true, all of them stem from the plots of different movies. None of them are false. They are just a part of the different films released. Well, let us start with The Blob. This 1958 sci-fi horror release is the first movie out of the four that we will discuss. This movie sees Blob crash land in a town in Pennsylvania embedded in a meteorite, and when a local townsperson goes to check on it, he becomes its first victim. The semi-engulfed person is immediately taken to a local doctor, only to soon be fully devoured by the Blob. And then the doctor's office becomes the ground for more victims, before Blob makes its escape. Now in this film, Blob is more of a mindless, alien gelatinous organism, who grows bigger and redder the more people it feeds on. And by feeds on, I mean engulfing and simply dissolving. So in this 1958 piece, Blob is an alien with very sluggish yet lethal attributes. The sequel, released in 1972, sees Blob as the same alien organism, with no change in its origin. So we will talk about this sequel more elaborately a bit later. If we move on to the next eponymous release of 1988, then we have a slightly different origin for Blob. In this remake of the 1958 The Blob, our creature yet again crash lands on Earth, but this time in California. And what follows is very similar to the original. But it is soon discovered that in this remake, Blob is actually a deadly biological warfare experiment that happened during the Cold War. However, due to the dangers it posed, the scientists deemed it fit to launch the experiment into space in a satellite, but no one predicted the changes caused by space radiation. This in turn led to the Blob growing out of control, knocking the satellite out of orbit and inadvertently crashing back on Earth. So yes, Blob is still the creature that crashed onto Earth, but this time it isn't an extraterrestrial being, but a failed bioweapon, too dangerous to keep. The last one we have before moving on to the next topic is the upcoming movie, still in the works. This is yet another remake where producer David S. Goyer, who also produced the famous The Sandman, is said to bring in another twist to the origin of Blob. The amoeboid creature just keeps shuffling its origin around, huh? Seems fun anyway. So what is the shift in Blob's genesis this time? Well, according to producer Goyer, first of all, the last one was done in the 80s, and there's been massive technological advancements. One of the decisions we made is, instead of the Blob coming from space, it's something that is made in the lab. This sounds very interesting, right? But wait till you hear what more he had to say. Apparently, this move for the change in Blob's origin has another major reason behind it: the current anxiety-provoking fears of people of this generation. In the era of changing technology and scientific expansions, a lab-grown cannibal mass is quite plausible, and surely terrifying. Wait until the end of the video if you want to hear the expanded explanation of this. So now we know what the Blob actually is in those three versions, including the upcoming one. All are from three different decades, using the anxiety of those three vastly different generations to build the horror around it. Now let's hop on to the next significant question. for all the things Blob is capable of, does it have a brain, organs, or any senses at all? How does it work? Does the Blob have a brain, senses, or any organs? Strip away the shifting origins and focus on the creature itself, and the Blob is actually up to something very weird. A horror monster that quite literally has no anatomy to speak of. No eyes, no mouth, no limbs, no skeleton, no internal structure recognizable as such in either the 1958 version or the remake. It has only mass, a formless, gelatinous, protoplasmic blob, as is obvious from the name. This naturally raises the question of how an organism with no sensory organs and no definite brain or nervous system actually hunts anything. The honest answer, for the 1958 version at least, is that it mostly doesn't. It doesn't stalk victims so much as aimlessly ooze into anything and everything near it, engulfing and absorbing anything unfortunate enough to contact it. It's less of a hunter and more of a disaster. However, the 1988 version messes with this idea somewhat disturbingly, once you notice it. While a soldier with a flamethrower sprays it with fire, it doesn't get burned. It instead jams the nozzle closed with one of its pseudopods, turning the weapon against its wielder, toasting him in the process. This isn't an accident. It's an organism with no anatomy successfully solving a problem. At many points in the film, the Blob seems to be deliberately ambushing victims rather than wandering into them, making several fan sites and wikis describe it as intelligent, despite having structurally nothing to make it so. There's an even more precise example from earlier in the same film during the phone booth scene that we will visit in greater detail later, where, before it actually breaks in to kill Fran, the Blob purposefully shoves the half-dissolved sheriff toward the glass, leaving her to see clearly what waits outside. A mindless organism that is driven by simple hunger has no reason to do this, leaving her to get a clear view first. It's one of the many things that lead many reviewers and fans to see the 1988 version of the Blob as capable of thought, rather than simply being hungry. How does the Blob actually eat and grow? Okay, so now we come to the part which might sound funny when you hear it, but not so funny when you watch it. Let's talk about how the Blob eats. First of all, Blob's main agenda is to consume and then grow in size. Any victim gets eaten, and the next thing you know, it is bigger than you remember seeing last time. In the 1958 movie, what began as a fist-sized blob ended up becoming building-sized by the time the finale rolled in. It has a highly corrosive digestive system that burns flesh on contact, and literally absorbs its victims into its body, thus devouring them and growing its mass. More specifically, it is an amoeba-like organism that is highly acidic in nature, due to which it has the capacity to break down flesh and bone, and possibly any other material on Earth. But don't let its growing body fool you. Even after all this, it is still capable of squeezing through some of the smallest holes and spaces, jumping up on victims without any warning. What a character! Apart from growing in size, it also grows a deeper shade of red with every person eaten. Not only can this be reflective of its growing aggression and hunger, but it can also be symbolic on a deeper level. Such displays of deep red were often indicative of the Red Scare prevalent in the 1950s. It was a sort of paranoia that crept in with the fear of communism rising in society, which largely stemmed from fears surrounding the Soviet Union. So big displays of the color red usually meant bad news. What can the Blob's body physically do? Now, the no skeleton is the Blob's greatest weapon. A body that isn't a solid shape can become any shape. It can flatten, stretch, or squeeze through openings that it simply shouldn't be able to. Cracks in doors, manholes, drains, ventilation pipes, and all this being done by a creature of such size. A body without bones is a body that can go anywhere. The 1988 remake took this even further than the original. Instead of simply oozing forward as a large blob, here the Blob has the ability to reach out with different body parts that act as extensions, that is, tentacles or pseudopods, and as such can attack from a good number of feet away, which is surely an improvement on a creature just moving slowly forward. The Blob's body is more versatile, making it capable of holding onto objects and pulling them towards it with the help of tentacle-like body parts. One of the instances of the Blob using its pseudopods is in the 1988 movie itself, when a soldier tries to use a flamethrower on Blob in the hopes of burning it to a crisp, but fails to do so when the creature instead jams the nozzle of the weapon with one of its jelly-like tentacles, causing a backfire and burning the soldier and Reverend Meeker. This shows the physical upgrades Blob got as opposed to the sluggish and mindless creature in the original. Another instance of its physical prowess would be the phone booth scene in the same remake. We see a scene where Fran is inside a phone booth calling the sheriff's station when suddenly the Blob engulfs the whole phone booth itself, with her still trapped inside. This points to the low-key insane capacity the creature holds, despite being mostly jelly. And once again, in the same 1988 remake, we see a scene related to the sewers. This is when Blob has seeped into the sewers after comfortably devouring a few innocents. Here, Dr. Meadows is seen having a heated argument with Brian, and is about to kill Brian for exposing the scientist's secret, when all of a sudden a tentacle rises from the sewers and drags the scientist inside, instantly killing him. Another display of a clever use of body parts to pull people towards itself, even from a distance. Is there anything that can actually stop the Blob? In each and every one of this franchise's films, there is only one weakness which is upheld throughout: cold. Nothing else works, and in the 1988 film in particular, none of the conventional weaponry seem to harm it. Cold gases are able to repel it, and liquid nitrogen freezes it instantly. Now, because of the Blob's flexible and versatile nature, injuring it becomes very difficult. Soldiers blasting the creature in the sewers with grenades and bullets just enrage the creature as it comes out to rampage through the town. Any injuries caused by shootings or blasts close immediately without causing any damage. It doesn't even have any internal organs that can be critically damaged as such. Now, the Blob 1958 is the source of this cold solution, and it is dealt with in a very procedurally scientific way for a B-movie. It is found out that CO2 is able to coat and freeze the creature in place, at which point fire extinguishers are used on it, and it is then airlifted by plane to the Arctic, where it is parachuted onto the Arctic ice cap. Afterward, Lieutenant Dave Barton states that it's neutralized, for now, but not killed. And Steve Andrews' final line tells viewers that it's safe as long as the Arctic stays cold. Beware, The Blob 1972 relies in its climax on this concept of the cold, and it almost feels like the characters discover the same thing all over again, in yet another accident. Blocked in at a bowling alley with an adjacent ice rink, Bobby and Lisa don't make the discovery about the Blob's weakness until Bobby accidentally spills some ice onto the creature, and notices it receding and shrinking. This makes the pair realize that if it only took a little bit of ice and cold AC air, from back when they were trapped in Bobby's car and accidentally cranked up the AC, which made the Blob retreat, to make it shrink, then the ice rink's cooling system would be able to completely freeze the creature. Bobby then swings across the ice on a rope towards the control panel, flips the switch, and the creature is frozen solid on the ice right before the sheriff, who was about to torch the building with gas, finds out what happened. The Blob 1988 does reach the same conclusion, but in a slightly more unique way. While extinguishing a burning Reverend Meeker with a fire extinguisher, Meg Penny accidentally shoots the Blob's pseudopod with it, only for it to recoil and retreat. This catches her attention and leads to the last scene of the film, in which Brian Flagg utilizes a snow-making truck, while Meg blows up its liquid nitrogen tanks to freeze and crystallize the creature into fragments, which are then loaded onto a truck and shipped to the town's ice house. Look at these endings back to back, and it becomes very clear what each film has in common. In none of these films does the Blob die, and it has a consistent weakness: cold temperatures. Each and every film ends with the Blob still alive in some way, whether it is frozen in the Arctic, frozen on an ice rink floor, or shattered into fragments and stored within an ice house. There is never an outright kill. This consistent lack of a fatality is quite disciplined of the franchise for low-budget sci-fi movies. Normally, creature features resort to killing the monsters to be able to explain why there is a new one or the last surviving fragment. The Blob series does not need to do this if they are able to thaw out the exact same creature again, whether that is 15 years later or whenever Reverend Meeker believes he has received a sign from God in the 1988 movie. Then why go through so much trouble, right? How different is the Blob's personality between 1958 and 1988? To get an understanding of how different the Blob's personality is in the 1958 movie versus the 1988 movie, we have to look at its characteristics in each movie first. In the 1958 version, Blob has just been introduced to the world of cinema, and here it is a slow, mindless creature who doesn't hunt or attack people as much as it just collides with things and people and just absorbs them. Sounds like a weird vacuum cleaner. But this vacuum cleaner grows in size afterwards. It simply keeps eating and expanding without much purpose. This takes a shift in the 1988 remake of the movie, where the audience soon notices that this time Blob seems to be making intelligent and almost strategic moves to trap and devour its victims. It uses predatory tactics and ambushes people before making them its meal. Like previously given examples of retaliation during the flamethrower scene, or when it smartly drags the scientist Dr. Meadows into the sewers by just the use of its tentacles, it makes it clear that the remake has changed Blob's personality to some degree, making it a cleverer and even very aggressive villain. This may have been an attempt by the filmmakers at making Blob more of an active monster, for better effects, for an audience that is no longer that easily scared as compared to the 50s time period. So, while the Blob was just a mindless and hungry monster in the 1958 version of the film, in the 1988 one, it is portrayed more like an intelligent hunter. What is the most infamous kill across the films? Let's look at two honorable mentions before moving on to the one we want to frame the whole beat around. You've got the movie theater and projection booth scene from The Blob 1988, which specifically recalls the infamous theater stampede scene from its predecessor, and judging by some early news on the Bruckner-directed remake, appears to be one being revisited in some form. There's also the ice rink scene from Beware the Blob 1972, typically singled out as the sole moment that movie offers any kind of memorable payoff, after devolving into silly comedy, for the few instances that it briefly takes the story back to some sense of genuine suspense. But the one actually worth picking apart is Fran Hewitt's demise in the phone booth in The Blob 1988. The diner's owner, Fran, rushes outside in a panic after seeing the handyman get sucked into the drain, and ducks into a phone booth to call for the authorities. But of course the monster is already outside and closing in, slowly oozing over the top of the booth. After reaching the sheriff's office over the phone and being told the guy isn't currently in, she sees the Blob approach and place the poor sheriff's half-dissolved body against the window, for her to witness her killer's capabilities, before becoming the victim the very next second. Yep, he immediately engulfs the whole phone booth in one go, with Fran still trapped inside. Look at the malice of the Blob before killing her, jeez. What's smart about the kill isn't really the guts, but rather the slow burn nature of its proceedings. The phone booth appears to offer no genuine protection. It's in a shabby condition, and the Blob spends ample time slowly sealing off the 4x4 glass, confining Fran before actually tearing it down. There's more there to it than a mere trap and kill. The intelligent hunter aspect of the Blob meets the there is nowhere left to run from this formless entity, creating a showcase of wonderful body horror. This is the sort of scene that horror websites and writers will routinely indicate is the unique characteristic of The Blob 1988. How does the Beware the Blob 1972 fit into the story? Beware the Blob of 1972 is the franchise's official sequel, not a remake, but an actual continuation, picked up roughly 15 years after the events of the 1958 film. So the plot follows an oil pipeline engineer named Chester Hargis, who has just gotten back from working in the North Pole to his house in Los Angeles. Along with him, he has brought back a container that has a small, mysterious sample of a frozen substance, which he found while working on one of the sites. He is eager enough to take it to the lab one day, and in the meantime has kept it in the freezer of his refrigerator. However, his wife, Marianne, takes it out one day and forgets to keep it back inside, letting the container thaw and inadvertently letting the Blob loose. It starts with a fly and then moves on to eating the cat, and soon, very ambitiously, ends up feasting on Marianne and eventually even Chester. Things start getting messy henceforth, and the town once again becomes the victim of the Blob. And while the ice-cold aspect is held true in this movie too, What is unusual about this movie is the comedic aspect to it, as opposed to the previous horror ones. Directed by the well-known Larry Hagman, this movie takes on a comedic approach to the storyline rather than straight horror, bringing some tension only at the end during the ice skating rink scene. This shift in tone feels like a complete 180 to the original, and even to the remake that happened in 1988. However, it is still a sequel to the original The Blob of 1958, and despite the comedy elements of the movie, is part of the franchise. How did the 1988 remake change the Blob's origin, and why? Let's peel back and take a deeper look into the actual bioweapon reveal for a bit. Through Brian and Meg's investigation, it is revealed that the government actually already knows what the Blob is. The government knows its location, and Dr. Meadows and his team are actively trying to retrieve it, instead of warning the city, because they view it as a potentially viable weapon rather than a dangerous creature that needs to be exterminated. Running parallel to this plot, we have the town preacher Reverend Meeker. After witnessing the whole scenario, he proclaims that the Blob incident is the apocalyptic sign described in the holy texts. By the end of the film, severely injured and partially blinded by a backfiring flamethrower, Meeker ends up with a piece of the live creature kept in a jar. And the end scene implies that the Blob may be unleashed again when he receives the right sign from his lord. Combine the two plots and you see the thematic core. While the original Blob is be wary of outside invasion, as was the prevalent mode of thought back in the days of Sputnik, its remake is about be aware of the powers that govern you, tinged with 1980s paranoia, as well as the undercurrent of a dangerous, quickly brewing religious extremism, a subplot that seems equally dangerous as the monster. This framing of distrust in the government has been long visible in our protagonist, Brian Flagg, since the beginning of the movie, even before the whole Blob incident happened. This aspect is even written into his fashion sense with the typical leather jacket, while he is portrayed as a rebellious punk. This makes him hard to believe, but ultimately the townspeople believe his instincts. Meadows, on the other hand, is not just an incompetent fool. He's hiding the creature because of its perceived tactical value. The organism hasn't really changed much between both film versions, yet the organizations responsible for it are what have changed, and are what the film wants you to be wary of. Is a new Blob movie actually happening? Yep, Warner Brothers has a new live-action Blob movie officially in the works from writer-director David Bruckner, Hellraiser 2022, The Night House, The Ritual. David Goyer and Keith Levine are producing it. The project was in a research and development phase, according to Goyer, in August 2025, with much of the work focusing on determining visual effects and practical effects for the creature before they moved any further. Goyer confirmed in August 2025 that the origins are shifting once again, moving away from any extraterrestrial influences and towards something that is made in the lab, which links it more directly to current anxiety about gene editing and AI as opposed to 1950s concerns about space or Cold War concerns from the 80s. And even though it sounds like it's going to be different in many respects, it has also hinted that the film will feature a version of a movie theater scene in homage to the original and 1988 films, which both contained one. The producer has also commented on the deliberate genre choice for the movie. If you think of horror as a cautionary tale or reflecting contemporary fears, there was a lot of fear about Sputnik and space when the first Blob came out. A lot of things going on right now, the use of AI and gene editing and the slippery slope of all that work entails. That is our approach to this film. Has the Blob left its mark outside the films? Each year in July, the original Colonial Theater in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, the very theater where the climactic run-out scene in the original film happened, and where the crowd pours out of the doors fleeing the creature, throws an annual festival themed around the original movie called Blobfest. The festival completed its 27th year in 2026, from July 10th through 12th, featuring a carnival-inspired theme with an immersive pre-show, culminating in a recreation of the Run-Out, where the audience actually charges out of the theater's front doors together. At this point, the event is no longer merely the niche film nerd convention it must have once been, because it now has a street fair and a costume ball, as well as a themed 5K run, and it's all centered on a film shot on that very street decades ago. It is worth knowing that there's a delightful pop culture cameo too. During Grease 1978, when Sandy, Danny, and the gang are pulling up to the drive-in for the fateful evening, the original The Blob preview trailer flashes across the screen. It's a minor but still notable example of a crossover this franchise has received. And a last quiet weirdness, the franchise is linked across 2 of its installments via one actor. Del Close appears in Beware the Blob 1972 as the one-eyed hobo, and then 16 years later, he reemerges for The Blob 1988 as Reverend Meeker. In both the movies, his characters are associated with damage to one eye, and despite the lack of marketing of this casting connection, it is still a significant one. Why has something this simple stayed scary for almost 70 years? Now, take a step back and tie the shifting origins back to some real-world fears of each era. We have the alien invasion paranoia happening around the mid-50s, we have the skepticism that boiled to the surface regarding bioweapons being made, and military-based experiments happening during the Cold War, and then finally the anxiety period that the upcoming Bruckner movie would reveal, that is, the threat of AI and consequences of lab-engineered organisms. 3 different eras addressing 3 completely different fears and societal concerns, but the same formless amoeba-like creature wreaking havoc. This creature does not need to have a threatening side to it because much of the work is done by the creators of it. The Blob acts as a blatant mirror to the fears that the society of that decade is currently facing. So why need a redesign with every different movie when you can just have a new reason to exist by exploiting the people's fear and doubts? Well, now we have come to the end of our video. And by now you must have realized one thing. The Blob might just be a piece of goo, but it does not need any shape or form to be able to terrorize the audience, especially when the movie does a good job at studying and utilizing society's vexations, anxieties, and paranoia stemming from the unrest going on in those times. Look at aliens, look at war-based bioweapons, and at the same time extreme devotion to religion, and currently the evil side of technological advancements. But I won't repeat myself over and over. In short, The Blob and its subsequent movies are cult classics that keep changing the origins of their monster, and that too of a monster with such fascinating anatomy. So, what do you guys think about the upcoming remake of The Blob? Are you guys excited? What are your expectations? Let me know in the comments. And before you leave, don't forget to like and share this video, and subscribe to the channel for more such content. See you next time!